This here is the best car of 2019, in my opinion. Now, to get straight to the point, the reason I feel that way is because mainly
we interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
it's a thing that you're supposed to do when you've got a YouTube channel. Hey guys, what's up guys? Don't forget to hit the subscribe button guys and that notification bell, you guys. Thanks guys. Sorry. You won't regret it though, because according to one fan, I've got it written down here, you video sucks, your jokes are flat and you do talk nonsense for a good 50% of the time. In other words, half of what you're about to see will be useful information, which is pretty good if you ask me, because I know for a fact that only 10 to 15% of the information in a Top Gear review is useful.
What the friggin' hell's that in me car? Get out!
Man's not hot. Never hot.
Toyota Supra. Really excited about this one. That's because way back in the mid-90s, when teenage me was learning about cars using a PS1 controller, the Supra was the coolest and the most exotic of all the Japanese performance cars that Gran Turismo tended to fetishize. Supercar performance, near enough, rarely seen in real life, unlike the Subaru Impreza, and of course, enormous spoiler. In 2008, I finally got to drive an Impreza Turbo, and it remains the second most disappointing experience I've ever had in a car. The first one being the time that I flicked a tab out of the window of my Rover 25 and set fire to a cyclist. True story, sort of. I didn't set him on fire, I just burnt a tiny little hole in his little light red shorts. Still, I stopped smoking shortly after that. Not really because of this, it was more to do with the whole cancer thing. Anyways, the Impreza totally sucked, and that's the reason why I'm almost glad that I've never actually driven a last gen Supra. Never meet your heroes and all that. So just to give you a little bit of background, it is 17 years since Toyota killed off the last Supra. That being the fourth one, a car that went on sale 26 whole years ago. And although Toyota hasn't really explained why the gap was so big, you could argue that by the early 2000s, Toyota had figured out that this whole thing, the petrol-electric hybrid thing that is, might just be a slightly better niche on which to hang its financial hat than the budget supercar coupe style one. Depressingly, Toyota was right. However, in the intervening years, there have been a few significant things happened that have paved the way for a new Supra. Firstly, and most conjectury really, you could argue that the older millennials and the Gen Xers that are now hitting their 40s are getting to the stage where they can afford to indulge in this sort of pre-midlife crisis video game nostalgia trip. Some people call that phase of a man's life the menopause. I guess we can call this Supraman syndrome. The next thing can be summed up in 3 words: Porsche Cayman. People like a good 2-seat sports car, and they are willing to pay for it. And finally, there's the existence of the Toyota GT86, which, according to a Toyota engineer called Tetsuya, man in charge of the Supra anyway, he said, helped broaden the scope and appeal of Toyota's sports cars. Now that's a word salad when you actually think about it, because all it really means is that Toyota made a sports car and some people bought it. I didn't really like the GT86 as it happens. I thought it felt heavy and a bit old school and a bit underpowered. However, the GT86 was a joint project with another manufacturer, namely Subaru, who released exactly the same car. This one called the BRZ. And what that proved for Toyota was that making a sports car alongside another manufacturer was possible, and a very successful one at that. Step in, BMW. Yep, underneath the Supra here is none other than a BMW Z4, making this the sort of collab that usually results in a ludicrously overpriced pair of shoes. And as much as Toyota is understandably reticent to divulge which parts belong to whom, it's probably fair to say that the Supra is more a reskinned Z4 than the other way around. The engine, the gearbox, the chassis, and significant swathes of the electronics and the switchgear all come from BMW. It's also built alongside the Z4 in Austria. It's the first Supra to be built outside of Japan. So to go back to the trainer thing, BMW is Nike, where Toyota has come along and stitched its logo on a pair of Air Maxes. But what a smashing pair has resulted. So the interior, right? Now, at a cursory glance, it does look very different to a Z4's, but when you're in there, it really is like sitting inside a BMW. And that's because most of what you interact with is Bavaria unsheathed. It has iDrive for a start, using the standard issue BMW rotary dial and switchgear. And all these buttons along here, BMW, this screen and all the software and all the fonts are BMW. The indicator stalks are from BMW and all the buttons on the steering wheel are. Honestly, if you cover the badge up and you put a BMW owner in here, they would almost certainly think that they were sitting in a Z4. Albeit one that's hampered aesthetically by Toyota's well-rehearsed penchant for making a dull car interior. On the one hand, using BMW's infotainment system is a masterstroke because Toyota is absolutely crap at doing those things. This is the only Toyota I've ever driven that has Apple CarPlay, and not just Apple CarPlay, wireless Apple CarPlay. On the other hand, Toyota has still somehow managed to design it so that it looks like a Z4 from 10 years ago. It's crying out for a bit of colour and a bit more personality. Still, let's keep perspective. This is a nice, high quality, intuitive cabin whose fundamentals are sound. Better than sound. Driving position is fantastic, even if you're as tall as me. It's that prototypical low slung, arse on the floor, arms stretched sports car driving position, you know? Really makes you feel like you're part of the car. Now, it probably looks like I'm a bit cramped in here, but that's actually because the canopy is quite low. You will bang your head on this at some stage, no matter how tall you are. Now, front visibility is okay, but looking back over, rear 3/4 visibility especially is pretty awful. None of this is enough to hamper the enjoyment of driving the car. It's certainly better than being in like a Lotus Elise. It's also relatively extremely practical. Now, I don't really care how many litres the boot holds, and nor will you, but it's big and it's got a massive tailgate, so it's very practical. For example, this week I took it to Aldi to do my big shop, and look what happened. By contrast, look what happened when I did a little shop at the same place in an Alpine. And that's because of the engine layout. You see, the Supra puts the engine in front of your bonds, while the Alpine, and the Porsche Cayman for that matter, put it behind. The upshot is that those two cars have two boots, but they're both pretty useless, whereas this just has the one, and it's massive, relatively. Also, unlike the Alpine, this has two whole cup holders and an actual glove box. And all joking aside, that is important because it is the difference between feasibly being able to use this as an everyday car and just not. Because you know, this and an Alpine P and a similarly quick Porsche Cayman all cost around the same money. Almost as though they did that on purpose. Yes, all approximately 50-ish grand exactly. You see, there might be a Z4 hiding underneath the Supra, but the two cars really are aimed at very different people. A fact that I'm sure made the whole partnership far more palatable for BMW in particular. They're both sports cars, sure, but the BMW is a lot softer and a lot more white leather sofa people, if you know what I mean. This though, driver's car. So yeah, the most impressive thing about this is that it holds a candle to both the Alpine P and the Cayman dynamically. Both of those, of course, hugely engaging cars to drive. The balance that this has is just immense. I mean, it does feel a bit blunt compared to the Alpine P and a Cayman, but not in a way that would really bother you. It sounds so good. You probably do want a little bit more from the brakes, to be honest. They don't seem to scrub the speed off quite as quickly as you'd want. But not a problem, just takes a bit more anticipation, and then you get a bit of straight road and bosh, it just keeps going and going and going. It's just mega. It is easy to look at this thing and determine that it's going to be all mouth and no trousers, especially because when you're driving it around, it does occasionally make you feel like you're an extra in a crappy car film. Quick aesthetic detour, but this car does look ridiculous when you zoom into it. All these little grills are fake, and it just seems to have loads of stuff sort of stuck onto it and loads of creases, and this huge chunk of black plastic at the back. And yet pull back and it all works somehow. I think so anyway. So yeah, if it looks like it's compensating for something on the outside, don't worry, because it really isn't. This thing, it drives and it moves. The engine is phenomenal, and for me it's actually the highlight of the car. BMW 6-cylinder turbo, so not only does it sound great, as you can probably hear, but it has instant responsiveness no matter where you are on the rev range, all the way from like 1000 RPM right up to the 6,500 rev limiter. It just keeps pulling. Believe it or not, it does feel quicker than like, what's it, 4.3 to 62? And that's because the low end pickup is just like brutal. You can only get an automatic gearbox, and it's an 8-speeder, and it's not a twin clutcher like you get in the Alpine and in the Cayman. The only real criticism I have of the gearbox is that when it's in sport mode, the downshifts are programmed to be really aggressive, and actually they're too aggressive in my opinion. It just puts this shunt through the drivetrain that you don't necessarily want or need. But generally, I've never been in a situation where this has felt like it's in the wrong gear or it's been sluggish to get to the right gear. Sort of gearbox that mash your foot onto the floor and it'll jump like 2 or 3 ratios and bosh, off you go. And then of course there are people who bemoan the fact that this doesn't have a manual gearbox, and I understand that. I understand why people would want to have that connection. But Personally, I don't miss it because in a car like this that's this quick and this sharp, for me it's better just to be able to concentrate on turning the thing, getting around corners as quickly and as smoothly as you're willing and able to do. And of course, if you want to feel a bit more heroic, you can use the paddle shifters. And this is where you get into the nuance a bit more. So if you compare the Supra to an Alpine, and we'll conveniently forget about the Porsche Cayman now, you'll see that even though they're in roughly the same price and performance ballpark, the Alpine not only has its engine in a completely different place, it's also significantly lighter. And that's largely why when I drove the Alpine, I said that this fella, one of the most funnest things you will ever drive. But I swear, right, that this is very close, and it's a lot closer than I thought it was going to be, and I think that's why I've taken to this car so much. It hasn't got quite the surgical precision or the lightness on its tyres as the Alpine, right? But it turns in really sharply, it has tons of grip, and it has far more lightness at the front end than you think it's going to have. It all at once feels hefty and powerful, but also has this lightness of touch. It doesn't have quite the rawness of a Cayman or the precision of an Alpine, but as an overall package, it's still really enjoyable. It's like 9/10 of those two cars to drive when I expected it to be half as good. And that's what's so cool about it. The other reason it's so appealing is that it's just dead good at the day-to-day nonsense, just getting you around. Not just because of the boot, but because it's reasonably comfortable and reasonably quiet. The only real problems you have in here in terms of refinement are when you're at higher speeds, there is a lot of tyre noise. Seats are a bit tight, and of course it's a sports car, so the suspension's a bit juddery. Ultimately, you can live with this car in a way that I don't think you can with an Alpine. Criticisms then? Not many, to be honest. The only thing that's really bugging me about it is the driving modes. I just don't think they make enough difference. I don't think they're far apart enough. You go into sport mode and all that really happens is the gearbox gets more aggressive. If you really try hard, you can feel that the suspension's tightened up a little bit and the steering has as well. Got a bit more weight to it. But I think what they should have done is made normal mode that bit more supple, that bit more comfortable, and then really separated out sport mode so that it feels like you're ready to go onto a track. This car moves like it should be spitting flames in sport mode, so you want it to sound like
The ting goes
but you know, the fundamentals are all good, so no biggie. And certainly there are no issues that get in the way of this being my favourite car of 2019 so far, and actually one of my favourite cars of all time. Now, I'm not saying that it's destined to become a future classic or even that everybody's going to like it, but you know when you just have a specific connection with a car? Well, that's sort of what's happened here. Sadly, I couldn't buy one even if I had the money lying around. And nor can you. Toyota has already flogged all 900 of these that are destined for the European market, and it's not really clear when the next lot are going to arrive, or what they're even going to look like, because Toyota is thinking about maybe a more powerful one, or one with a manual gearbox. So while I can stand here and tell you that there are two versions and they cost this much and that this is the extra stuff you get with the higher level version, it's all totally pointless. So there you go, Toyota Supra. Brilliant. 16-year-old me is very relieved, and 39-year-old me now has something to focus on when the inevitable midlife crisis comes. Thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed it. If you haven't hit the subscribe button already, please do that. I'm sorry for asking twice, but it does really make a big difference to us. Next week I'm driving an electric Hyundai, so we're crashing back down to the real world with a bang. See you soon, bye! So there you go, Toyota Supra, brilliant. 16-year-old me is, oh, hell, and 39-year-old me has a sore head.